Welcome to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno. Today's very special guest from Sportsnet, social media producer Alex Dedeze. Alex, I'm really glad to have you on today's episode. It's been a little bit of back and forth through the hectic time of the late spring, early summer sports seasons, but glad to finally have you on board, man.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been playoff time is definitely a hectic time. It's there's very little downtime and a lot going on. So glad that we finally got this sorted out.
Now, during playoff time, how much sleep do you get? Because I can only imagine how crazy your sleep schedule is with uploading, coding, shooting, everything.
Yeah, there's you lose a few more hours of sleep in the playoffs. I think especially since our team's gone through a bunch of changes over the last, probably year, 2 years, just based off of, just the social world evolving and adding more people to the team and everything. So obviously we take on a lot more. Um, yeah, it's there's a lot going on between, especially with, I focus a lot on content, and unfortunately content never sleeps. So unfortunately, it means I can't either. So yeah, it kind of ranges. Some nights you get a good amount of sleep, and then more nights than often, you're not getting a whole lot of sleep, and you're going to sleep at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. But it's the unfortunate part of social and content that way, where NHL GMs don't really care when you go to sleep. They just want to make sure they get their stuff done and their news out.
How do you balance the living as a regular human being versus having to make sure that you're on the ball for content whenever it's needed to be posted?
Uh, Probably two things: Twitter notifications and Microsoft Excel. Those are my two things that keep me sane. I've got notifications on for probably anybody you could probably name, both good and bad, because that means my phone's always going. But at the same time, it means if something's happening, I'm in the loop on it. And then I just you kind of gotta always work ahead. Like especially with the off season, like there's rumors galore, and there's you don't know where players are going to go, and you kind of sometimes you kind of have to take a chance on having some stuff prepared, and like jersey swaps and all that stuff. That stuff's not exactly easy and quick. So yeah, a lot of it's kind of a bit of a guessing game, but also some of it too. If you hear enough chatter about some things, it's usually there's a little more fire in that rumor.
Now, you've done a lot of graphic design stuff for Sportsnet combined with your social media work and have produced a portfolio of some magnificent pieces, but
Thank you.
unfortunately, some that have gone to the graveyard because of rumors not manifesting. How long does it take you to create the average graphic edit or jersey swap, all those sorts of things within the umbrella of graphic design?
I think it varies. Some of it, I found a lot of it now. At the beginning, I was very much so like I want to do everything was super nice and pretty and all that stuff. That do super big graphics. Then I realized, oh, if I do that for everything, I'm gonna have no time to sleep and eat and just be functional as a human. So now I've kind of gotten more into the state of you kind of figure out now that I know kind of what our audience likes and what our audience engages with the most, and just like what are big stories and all that stuff. You kind of figure out how much effort you're going to put into it as far as is this going to be something that's like super detailed, or can we get away with something that's a little less detailed? um, Jersey swaps and things like that, I like to say I've gotten pretty good at them, or I've gotten better at them, or at least my process wise. um, if I'm having to like start from scratch, then if I can find the right pictures and everything that go with it fairly quickly, maybe it's an hour, maybe 2 hours of work at most. But sometimes like those like big fancy graphics and stuff, sometimes those are days. um, it's you start on it, you work on your idea, and then you kind of go, okay, my brain's not functioning. You come back to it the next day, put a little bit more into it, change up some other things. One day you might like how it looks, next day you go, I don't like how this looks, move some things around. So it ranges from hours to potentially days. Sometimes you just let things sit for a week, and then you kind of come back to it. Like I remember there was one I did of Joe Burrow that unfortunately I think it got reworked so we could use it, but it ended up it was if the Bengals won the Super Bowl this past year. that one never saw the light of day, unfortunately. But I think that one was a couple of days. So it varies. It varies depending on what you're looking to do, how much effort you want to put into it, and what the outcome you're looking for is.
Do you ever have difficulty settling into the reality of knowing that there's a lot of work you're producing that may never be used?
Yeah, I think it's kind of one of those things that kind of just comes with the job. Um, you kind of just come to the realization that not everything's going to be seeing the light of day. A lot of the times, a lot of the stuff that we do now, like a lot of it's pretty good about what we call like evergreen content. So it doesn't really matter the time, or it's not tied to a specific event or a person or a certain thing happening. So it could be like, which player would you rather have on your team, or who, which player skill like would you rather have, things like that, where it's really not tied to anything. So it's you can make it and you might use it in a day, you might use it in later that week, you might use it in a month. Like there's stuff I've got that I've had banked for probably like a year, and I can still go back to it and grab it and say, oh, this is, maybe I just need to update stats or something like that, but it's still relevant. A lot of those ideas are where I go back to my Microsoft Excel sheet, and everyone I work with calls it a mess, but it's got all my ideas and anything and everything I've thought of or come up with, or ideas that I want to continue going forward with using on our page.
So, as a creative, there's obviously a lot of different elements of social media and content that exist within Twitter, Instagram, all platforms. What would you say is your favorite platform to use for social media? And which one do you think is the most challenging to use? I mean, most challenging, not necessarily to say that it's hard, but that you find the most difficult to work.
I think same thing. It kind of varies. I've definitely grown a lot more accustomed to Twitter than anything. I think Twitter has the biggest reach. If you're trying to reach a new audience, if you're trying to engage with a different community that you typically wouldn't. Like obviously, Sportsnet's a very hockey focused, very Blue Jays focused, very Raptors focused account. But obviously, that's where our audience is. And if we're trying to get into more of like an NFL space or something like that, Twitter's a little easier to get people involved there. So it's always a lot more fun to make things for there, just because you see a little more kind of traction there. Instagram, I think, lends itself really well to kind of the big fancy pieces and kind of the standalone pieces. Um, I think Facebook is something that a lot of people aren't using anymore. So it's always tough to design specific things for Facebook, but a lot of what we do kind of goes across, multiple platforms and stuff like that. So usually if you're designing it for one, you're kind of designing it for all. But there's a lot of stuff we'll test out on Twitter, and that's kind of our main focus is on Twitter, and then everything else is kind of going, okay, either it worked on Twitter, didn't work on Twitter, and if it did work on Twitter, how else can we use it elsewhere?
I want to dial it back a little bit because as we were chit chatting a little bit before we started recording, your journey, like every person's in sports, is like a snowflake. No two are the same. And you dabbled a little bit in university in Windsor before finally going to Ryerson, now currently known as Toronto Metropolitan University, to take sport media in the inaugural brand new class of 2014, the year they started. What made you decide to go take the sport media program?
I think it was I think it was just kind of like I always knew I wanted to go to Ryerson. I always knew RTA was probably I think it's called creative school now or whatever it's called. But I think like that faculty was always something I always knew I wanted to be involved in. I knew that was probably the space. And then obviously like I love sports. Sports is what I live and breathe. As soon as I saw, sport media, I was like, and at the time too, I was like, I was kind of flip flopping back and forth between, do I want to leave Windsor? Do I not want to leave Windsor? I just wasn't really enjoying it at the time. But at the same time, I had gone there originally just because I was like, well, I don't really want to stay at home anymore. Um, Went there, kind of tried it out, didn't work for me. But then, yeah, once I saw sport media, I basically was like, yeah, that's where I'm going. And I don't, whether it's this year, next year, whenever it is, like that's the program I'm aiming to get into. I was lucky enough to be involved in that initial class of sport media, and there were definitely some ups and downs, but obviously trying to, it's a brand new program. You're trying to everything you're doing for the first time, the profs are doing for the first time. Just about teaching the class and stuff. So there's obviously some kinks and everything that had to get worked out with that program, but I think it's a pretty good place now too.
What did you take at Windsor originally?
It was like visual arts and communication, media and film. Um, and I was led more to believe that it was a little more like RTA, where it's kind of hands-on-y. You can kind of you get a camera in your hands. You can kind of I've always liked doing things, so I've never been like the guy who likes sitting there writing essays and book reports. I was give me a camera, I'll go film something, go photograph something, whatever. I just want to do things. Um, so being able to, that's where I was led to. That it was like, yeah, this big thing where you can make videos and this and that. I was like, all right, let's give it a try. And then it was very much so not that in the first semester. So then at the time, yeah, I think just that being away from family, it's being 4 hours away or whatever, 2 hour via rail ride that I took many times. That was it wasn't for me, and then I ended up obviously finding Ryerson, and that was just a perfect fit.
So it seems then that you always wanted to be in the creative space, judging by what you took at Windsor and then what you ended up doing at Ryerson. How did you find the experience during your 5 years at Ryerson?
So I was kind of lucky. So initially, when I was at Windsor, I had kind of reached out to the football team, and I was like, basically like, "Hey, do you want someone to come take pictures for you and kind of just do some stuff for them?" I'd worked for them a little bit. I'm pretty sure if I had stayed, I would have worked for them a little bit more. I ended up working for their student newspaper, and that's how I kind of got in more into like the sports photography realm. And then once I knew I was going to Ryerson, I ended up reaching out to their athletic department because I realized they had they call it work studies. So it's a whole program essentially where they just hire students and you have a variety of jobs. So I was a photographer, they had videographers, they had social media people that they eventually brought on, they had marketing guys, any job you can think of really. They had an opening or openings for it. Um, so I had reached out to their athletic department before, basically being like, "Hey, I'm coming there in the fall. I want to work for you guys." So my boss back then, so his name is Jim. So I'd emailed him, kind of met up with him and Andrea, who was I guess my other boss. Met up with them, and they offered me a position, and I was there for 5 years. Shot, I think it was something like over 600 games over the 5 years. National championships, everything. That was kind of the foundation for kind of where I've gotten to now, and kind of just pushing my kind of creative boundaries. Obviously, getting to work in the old Maple Leaf Gardens, that's a privilege in itself, and obviously it offers different things that a lot of other OUA schools don't or can't offer. Just size, space, history. So it was I definitely enjoying my time there would definitely be an understatement.
What was your favorite memory from covering any games with Ryerson?
Man, there's a lot. I think the first one that comes to mind is probably the men's basketball team winning the OUA championship on the home court. I think we beat Carleton in the finals or something like that. I think it was Carleton, but it was like the first time that like in like 5 years that Carleton hadn't won OUAs. And we were kind of like this like plucky underdog team that um, kind of came out of nowhere. Not really came out of nowhere, but we weren't really expected to do as well as we did that year. I just remember the vibe around the whole. Every game was always crazy, and then obviously it's the finals, and we kind of had like a super fan section and all that stuff, and those guys were always nuts. And it was like a smaller version of like an NCAA atmosphere. So obviously, it's those kind of atmospheres are obviously a little tougher in the OUA space because it's not the same attention on the university teams, but yeah, that's probably up there. I think there's so many of them, just from either like just interactions with people or different games and stuff that went on. Like there's countless memories that I can remember that obviously hold a special place in my heart. But I think yeah, that's if we're talking specific moments, that's definitely up there.
And right after school, it almost seemed like it was not long before you finally got your first full-time job working at Sportsnet, which is still where you currently are employed. How did the
Yes.
opportunity at Sportsnet come up, and what can you say about the experience ever since?
So I knew the guy, or I'd originally reached, so I knew the guy who was, I guess, in my position before me. And I'd actually reached out to him going into, I guess, what was my fifth year at Ryerson. And I basically was like, hey, I need an internship. Can I come intern for you guys? Um, Basically, one thing led to another. I didn't end up interning there. But then I think, a couple months later, he basically kind of reached out to me and was like, hey, I'm leaving. If you want me to, if you're interested, I can put your resume basically in front of my boss and kind of see what happens. Um, Ended up sending in my resume, ended up doing an interview, ended up getting the job. I think like we were chatting before, my first shift was during the Raptors Championship run was game one against Orlando in that first round. So it was definitely it wasn't an easy, comfortable first shift. It was quite the first shift. So the pressure definitely hit quickly. But I've enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed being here for just over 3 years now. Um, I've learned a lot. I've really grown in my skills, my abilities, my love for creating content and just kind of creating different types of things. Obviously being somewhere this long, I've learned a ton about just the business and just how media works and how um, sports organizations work. It's been a great opportunity for me. I really enjoyed it, and we'll kind of see where things take us in the future.
Now, what was that first shift like working the Raptors game in the playoffs, game one against Orlando way back in 2019? And what was it specifically that you were doing? And how did you feel that shift? What did you do to reel in the nerves, all that stuff?
I think it was pretty good. Like as far as nerves go, I was pretty good. Um, I've worked for like Hockey Canada. I've worked for like the NBA when they had All Star Weekend here in 2016. So my nerves weren't like too bad about just being like in a different atmosphere. But obviously, I get nervous when it comes, and I still do like to this day. It just what content am I going to capture? I got to make sure I get enough stuff. Just the general stuff that kind of those kind of nerves that come before any job. Um, I was doing like back then we did a lot more like Instagram. We called them Instagram story takeover. So we're just basically posting content to like our Instagram story. And if there's anything cool posted to like Twitter, to like our Instagram main feed back then. Um, that was basically the premise of what I was doing. But the issue was back then, I hadn't really done any of that stuff before in the past. So I basically got a social job with very little social experience. So it was kind of a lot of figuring it out on the fly and just kind of hoping and praying like, yeah, I think this is the content that we're looking for. um I think I actually did that first shift before I even did like my Rogers onboard training and like my company like orientation. So that was quite the experience. But yeah, overall, like it was terrifying at first, but obviously looking back, it was a good prelude to the kind of pressure and stuff you face kind of in media. um a lot of there's a lot of stuff that comes at you fast and a lot of stuff that comes quick, and you kind of have to learn to just kind of roll with the punches, and whatever's kind of put in front of you, you just kind of have to adapt and go, great, how can I either make the best of this situation or make sure you're prepared for if something like that happens in the future.
Now, obviously, with working in social media, art is subjective. So, what were some of the things that you really enjoyed about covering the Raptors championship? And what do you think, looking back, could have been done a bit better in terms of opportunities that maybe you didn't see at first?
I think the biggest one is back then we were like, oh, we'll start covering every game come the conference finals. Well, there was this little small event, one game before the conference finals, where Kawhi hit, kind of a big shot there. So I wasn't in the building for that. So I think after that, we were like, hey, we should probably start going to a lot more games now. So that was, when it comes to missed opportunities, that's definitely one that sits up there and will stick up there for a while. Um, I think with like when it comes to like art and graphic design and all this stuff, I don't know if anybody's ever fully pleased with their work because you're always kind of evolving and changing, your style's changing, and there's different trends and everything like that. I think you're always looking for, what's next, or what can you do better, or what stuff like that. Like, how can you always improve? Like, that's, I think, one of the biggest things for me is I'm never like fully satisfied. Like, you can appreciate when you do something nice and you do a good piece or it does really well on social. You can always appreciate that. But I'm always looking for how can I improve myself or how can I better myself, to make sure either I'm staying ahead of the curve or staying ahead of trends, or just at least minimum keeping up with them, whether that's stylistically or just how people are posting content, things like that. So I think there's always things that I can look back on and say, wish I did this better, wish I did that better. I mean, obviously, just different things, like there's things we'll post, types of stuff we'll post now that we didn't post back then, where it's like, oh, that would have been really cool to post, or just kind of things like we'll go back and look and just be like, oh, there was this clip on broadcast where somehow it's not on our social feeds. So you kind of like things like that where you're like, we never aired this or we never showed this. So um those kinds of things they always kind of pop up. But yeah, um I think there's always room for improvement, especially when I think at the time I was no more than 6 weeks on the job.
And of course, and when you think about how much social media continues to evolve, whether it's memes, jokes, the style, whatever it is, people, if you even look at TikTok as an example, we'll see a trend that happened within the same year, maybe like 6, 7 months prior. And when people see a flashback, oh, trends that were popular in March of 2022, and you're in September, people are like, what? That seems like it was like 4 years ago. It's like, well, think
Yeah,
about how much has changed in 3 years, actually, when you're thinking that 6 months is forever.
it's honestly crazy. Like, especially like you're saying with TikTok. TikTok is something that changes on like a weekly, not even weekly, like it's almost a daily basis. There's new trends, or you're finding out about new trends, and there's new trending audios, and it's definitely a lot to keep up with. I think just across social, like I know the big thing now, like on like Twitter, is like teams will post like in their like grid of 4 pictures, and then you open it up and there's more pictures inside it. So that's like the new thing now. So um yeah, I mean, like it's great because it's showing that people across the industry are experimenting and they're trying new things, and obviously some things are catching on, and it's just kind of it's spreading itself across sports and just other forms of media, whether it's music or news or whatever it might be. But yeah, it's the trends are it's a lot to keep up with, and like you're saying, it changes very quickly. So it's definitely one of the biggest things with this job is just making sure you stay on top of trends and what stuff is doing well, and what content people are kind of searching for.
What was your favorite memory from the Raptors championship run, just from from the social perspective and from what you were doing with your job in particular?
I think because I was so kind of fresh at that point, that I think like I was on the court for when they handed out like the Eastern Conference Finals trophy or whatever. They were Eastern Conference champs. But I think, yeah, just because I was so fresh at that point, that it's just kind of like a wow, this happened like really quickly. In that kind of moment where I've been like before that, I'd been ice level for NHL games, like not necessarily shooting, but I'd just been down there. And you kind of feel that atmosphere. Um, I'd done NHL, I've done soccer, I'd done TFC before that. So, you kind of you kind of get that vibe, that feel. But being like on the court and you know, that swarm of people that are there for the trophy presentation, and at the time, I think all of our cell service kicked out because there was just 20,000 people on their phones. So obviously, the Rogers towers weren't exactly happy. So um, yeah, I think that was probably like my favorite moment, where it's just kind of like you kind of sit back and smell the roses kind of moment of just like you look around, you're like, oh, so this is pretty cool. It was the same kind of moment for me. Like I like we were mentioned before, I was down at the Cup Finals this year, and it's just I was on the ice for the trophy presentation and all that. It's just kind of like you sit there and just kind of drink it in, and you're like, this is really cool. And it's something you kind of look back on and you go, like 10-year-old me would be like, this is crazy. It's it's no winning the Stanley Cup or anything like that, but obviously it's a close second.
I mean, as a social or a creative person, you always get the opportunity, whether you're in amazing physical condition or not, to go and shoot, edit, and being able to be there for those moments. I think that's what makes sports even more fun if you were an athlete after your career, because then you don't have to worry about, well, am I competing against someone else? You're competing in something that doesn't require, your physical athletic ability, and it can push you with your creative boundaries to become even better and also still get to enjoy sports and help people enjoy sports in an even more engaging way than ever before.
Yeah, and I think honestly, I think a lot of it's, and I mean, we're seeing more of this about like the actual athletes themselves now, but it's a lot more mental than anything. I think it's, especially like I was saying before, Twitter is something where you can see a lot of things and you can see them from a wide variety. Like I can see, someone from India, like what they're designing, or like the big thing now is like you look at like what kids who are like 13, 14, 15-year olds, like what they're designing. And I'm looking at it going like, okay, this is like better than what I'm doing. And they're like 15. Um, so not necessarily like sitting there being like comparing yourself to like a 15-year-old, but it's the same kind of thing. Like you just see where people are at different stages and the kind of stuff they're producing, different events they're going to. So it's always kind of a mental battle of like not necessarily like comparing yourself to other people and kind of going like, I have my own path and kind of following down that. But at the same time, obviously, you see all the stuff they're producing and you want to kind of give everyone else their flowers and kind of go, you want them to feel appreciated as well. So yeah, it's definitely a mental battle too. Plus then there's always the always fun. You get trolls in your comments about, whether or not an idea is stupid and stuff. So that was something that definitely took me a while to kind of mentally get over, because obviously I'm someone who takes pride in his work, and I really value that side of things. And I think at first, because I wasn't really used to it, I came from primarily doing photography, and there really like it wasn't like it was like photography is very subjective in a sense, but sports is, you just kind of capture the action, and it really wasn't anything too crazy. Um, as far as like, people giving their opinions about this is a good photo, this is a bad photo. But obviously, if you're asking, who's better, is Landeskog or Tavares? Like, there's a lot of people online who have opinions and who are kind of keyboard warriors. So they don't know the people behind the accounts. So obviously, it's a tough battle to fight at first, but you kind of eventually learn that hey, I'm getting paid to post about sports, so I think I'm doing pretty good.
100%. And that's negativity on Twitter. It's, I think, only, you know, maybe a small percentage of people are actually actively vocal with negativity, but because obviously hate clicks generate a lot more engagement than positivity, it's really easy to believe that there's a perception of just entire negativity on the Twitter app. And you know, Twitter is a great tool for the spread of viral information, whether that's for good or for not. And I think with sports, it's definitely helpful for creatives being able to have their work seen by more people. But at the same time, because people like to troll or say, what, this person didn't do this, that, or the other, fire them. Or people trolling in the comments on who do you think is better, etc. All those sorts of things. Yes, it's super annoying, but at the same time, you're the person with the keys to the car and they're not. So
Yeah, it's I always say Twitter's a blessing and a curse. It's great because it's you can't really have nuanced conversations and stuff like that, but it's a really good conversational platform. But at the same time, no matter what you do, you're going to get trolls with it. So, like you're saying, I think it's a very small percentage of people. In the grand scheme of things, a lot of people are pretty receptive to a lot of stuff. So, you always try and focus on the positive when it comes down to that stuff. But yeah, it definitely takes a while, and it's always something I preach to new people who haven't really had experience in the social spaces. You kind of just got to roll with it. And the guy saying that this is a stupid idea isn't necessarily attacking you. He's just, for whatever reason, he's just having a shitty day.
what's your take on the way that corporations or big companies act on Twitter in terms of how they engage with fans? Because you see the more recently within the last month or two, I think it was, that the US Open page on Twitter, the verified one, had responded to some Seahawks fan who said that tennis is not a real sport, and they absolutely cooked him into oblivion. Now, obviously, places like Sportsnet or TSN wouldn't really do something as much like that. But where do you think is a healthy balance for that type of engagement versus being professional and proper and not engaging or giving trolls the light of day?
I think there's a place for both. I think that people are starting to realize more and more that obviously there's a person behind the account. And they kind of go, and you kind of want to have more of like a voice there. You also want to toe the line, obviously not going too far and, insulting people personally, because then obviously that's when people start to pile on, and obviously it gets a little more sticky of a situation then. But yeah, I think there's a place for both. I think that like we do it from time to time. Not necessarily like clapping back at people, but just as far as just engaging with fans, because I think there's people want to feel like they're part of a community. I think that's especially like with teams and stuff like that. That's really something that um, I guess I say as a community, have a leg up on just like the average person, where we've got these big followings and all these accounts where it's like, even do the same thing now. Like I've had it where I've had accounts respond to my personal account. You're kind of just like at bare minimum, you're like, oh, that's really cool. And you just kind of like it's that shot of like, you know, like dopamine where it's just like, oh wow, that's really cool. Like they responded to me. So it's a small thing where it's like, you can take 5 seconds, 10 seconds out of your shift, and a minute at worst, and just respond to someone or some people. There have been times too where like we'll clap back where someone would be like, this that's wrong. We'll be like, no, it's actually not. Or things like that. I know in the past, like for a while there, we were kind of clapping back at people, when they were kind of trashing like women's hockey or things like that, where it's kind of just like you kind of want to put your foot down of like, hey, there's just like you basically want to tell them like, hey, there's really no space for this in our community. And if you're if you're going to be involved in this, you're kind of setting that precedent of like, basically don't do this, or uh, not necessarily we'll come after you, but just this isn't the stuff we want to see on our page. So yeah, I think there's the good and the bad of it. I think the US Open one was phenomenal. I think that there's been some other ones from some like other like food accounts and stuff where it's kind of cringy. Same thing, time and place with everything. And I think that in the end, good content always speaks for itself.
Who are some of the social media accounts, whether it be teams or leagues or other sports organizations, that you believe are the gold standard or you look to for inspiration when you're doing content?
I think, even though like I guess you could qualify them as like as kind of competition, I think, Bleacher Report and like ESPN, like those guys are kind of the gold standard when not necessarily when it comes to coverage, but just how you kind of want to run like a news organization when it on social. They have a great mix of news and keeping people informed, because obviously that's super important, but also just having that fun lighter side of things, which a lot more people are looking towards, because obviously there's so much negativity kind of in the world nowadays. You kind of want social media to be kind of your escape at points. So whether that's a guy falling over, or a guy getting kicked in the nuts by his kid, whatever it might be, like those are the kind of things you're kind of looking for. Obviously, we still have to relate it to sports somehow. With it being a sports page, we're not going to post, some guy going, uh, partying with his friends and falling over. But I think those are probably the two that I look to the most. I think the like Fox, they've got all their different sports based ones. So they've got like MLB on Fox and WWE on Fox. Those guys are all really good. I think they just same thing. They have a nice balance of really kind of aesthetically pleasing graphics and just their general kind of cadence online, and it's a wider range. And then there's obviously a ton of teams and stuff too that they've got really good. They're really good like online. Like I think the Devils are pretty good. The Blue Jays I think are top notch. I mean, they're responding to like hundreds of fans a night. So I know the guy who runs their account. It's definitely a busy job for him, but him and his team, or all of them involved in it, they all do a great job.
What would be some of the tips that you would give to people who are looking to enter the sports industry, whether it be as a creative or photographer or just even in general, if they went into sport media?
I think there's a few. I think the biggest thing is kind of like what I was saying before, not to compare yourself to kind of where everyone else is at. Um, I think that's a thing that a lot of people just in life you get caught up in. Oh, this person's already bought a house. This person's bought a car. This person's got a promotion, whatever it might be. Um, it's so easy to get caught up in that, and I think we all do. I especially do. You get caught up in that stuff, and I think it's just kind of you got to take a step back and go, let me just focus on kind of bettering myself and making sure my work is where I want it to be, making sure everything's kind of sorted out that way. I think that's probably the biggest thing because it's like I was saying, it's so easy to get caught up in all that and just going, oh, this guy's already working for a university and this guy's working in the NHL, and kind of just sitting there, kind of being, if you want to say, being jealous of the position people are at. Um, but as far as like physical stuff to work on, I think the world we live in now is all connections. Um, so it's making sure you're not really burning bridges with people because you never know when you may need that connection. I'm not saying don't stand up for yourself, but obviously you don't want to be just kind of left and right telling people to screw off. Um, but I think connections are a huge thing nowadays, and that's probably the biggest. Like that's how I got this position. I knew the guy who was there. He helped me get an interview, and then that kind of got. And then I did the rest myself. Um, but that was kind of how it all started. And I think you're seeing more and more of that nowadays, where those connections are leading to people getting jobs or promotions, whatever it might be. And then obviously there's always the line of you can always be better yourself. Always looking to make sure your stuff's always better. Like same thing. Folk looking at trends, styles. I've got thousands of screenshots on my phone of just different styles of art and different things I've seen, content ideas, and just making sure you're always trying to kind of diversify what you can do because I think you're seeing a lot more of that nowadays too, where people are looking for people who can do multiple things. So the days of just being a videographer or just being a photographer, just doing one job. There's those jobs out there, but there's not a ton of them. There's a lot more of, hey, you're going to be a marketing person, but your job is social and game photography and marketing and this and that. So you kind of want to be pretty well rounded. Obviously, you don't want to be good at everything and great at nothing. You always want to have your area of expertise, but I think knowing more stuff like always is always beneficial because it's at bare minimum it just makes you more attractive when it comes to applying for jobs.
Do you believe that there is sometimes a line that's crossed with too many expectations and duties being put on one person in terms of the world of sports, whether it be having to be the photographer and do graphic design and do this, that, and the other? Or do you think that there's a manageable way to be able to have all those skills and to still be able to do good work without burning out?
Yeah, I think it's same thing. It's kind of a fine line. I think it depends on the person. I'm someone who I like going at 100 miles an hour speed and kind of always being busy, always like doing things. So for me, it's really not an issue. Obviously, there's everyone has their own breaking point. So at a certain point, yeah, you're going to get burned out. I've gone through it. I've gone through burnout. I've gone through all that stuff, and it's not fun. Yeah, I think in an ideal world, you get back to the days where somebody just focuses on social media and someone's just a photographer and just this. But I think just the way the world's evolved, just even you kind of look at what's going on nowadays, like obviously, money's tight for everybody, businesses especially. So they're always going to try and find ways to how can we get the most out of our product or the most out of our people while also keeping our costs low. So do I think that those days are gone? No, I think it'll kind of swing back a little bit the other way. But at the same time, I don't think there's ever going to be the day where you're just doing one job. I think everyone's always going to have their hand in something, whether it's a little bit or a lot. You're always going to be kind of asked to do some other stuff. What that is, same thing, depends on the job. But yeah, I think you're going to kind of always be having to do a couple of different things. You're always going to have a main focus, but it's kind of like taking a major and a minor in school. You've always got your main focus, but you're always going to kind of stray off and maybe do your history and your English and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's kind of where things are headed and where I see it right now.
Do you have any major goals for your career within the next 5 to 10 years that you've set out when you first started working at Sportsnet? Or do you find that you more go with the flow?
I've actually been pretty lucky. Since I started, doing photography when I was like sports photography, probably when I was closer to like 16, till basically up until Sportsnet. I've been pretty lucky to get a lot of pretty cool opportunities. Same thing, I've worked All Star Weekend. I've gone to, Stanley Cup Finals now. That's obviously, growing up a huge hockey fan. That's obviously a huge bucket list thing. Um, I think obviously same thing. I'm also like a pretty big soccer fan. Being Italian and all, it's kind of just you pop out and you're a soccer fan. Um, I think the World Cup's always something that's on the bucket list. Um, it'll be interesting. Like 2026 is not too far away for when it's coming to Canada, but obviously getting to go to another country and doing that whole experience, I think it's a totally different atmosphere than just being like, oh, let me just take the GO train down to BMO and go shoot and say I shot a World Cup game. So it's a different atmosphere, it's a different feel. I think that's definitely up there. Like I've done World Juniors and all that stuff, so a lot of the stuff that I'd I guess originally set out to do, I've been pretty lucky to do a lot of it so far. But obviously, if I can experience some of that stuff from a different perspective, so if I maybe I'm like the official photographer for the World Juniors, or doing social media for NBA Finals with like with like let's say with the NBA or whatever, like things like that are kind of more where I see I guess my next set of goals. Um, but yeah, I think World Cup, just kind of trying different experiences, kind of just seeing what kind of falls into my lap, is kind of where I'm at now. Um, there's really like nothing where I'm like, this is my next thing. I need to like work towards this. Um, we'll see where Sportsnet sends me next.
Alex, we're getting towards the end of our time on today's episode, so I wanted to have a wrap up round of fun questions before we part for today.
Beautiful. Let's go.
What's your favorite comedy movie of all time?
Oof. I don't know if you can qualify it as a comedy movie. I'm always a sucker for Goon, the old hockey movie. That's one I've watched many times. Um, that one's probably up there. I think the classic's always Wedding Crashers too. I mean, you can't go wrong with that.
What's your favorite TV show?
It's not on the air anymore. How I Met Your Mother. I don't know what it is. That I'm a sucker for it. That or Big Bang Theory. Those are my two go-to shows.
Favorite Italian dish?
Well, it's got to be. I mean, anything by Nona makes is the obvious answer. If you're narrowing down to foods, she makes a mean lasagna. So it's I'm always hoping for a little bit of that when I go over.
Okay, so if you're an Italian soccer fan, who in your lifetime would you say is the greatest Italian soccer player?
I mean, it's got to be Buffon. Like it's I don't know if it's up for question. Like him, Pirlo, those are probably the two. You could throw Francesco Totti in there. Those are probably the top three. I don't think anybody comes close to Buffon. I think just between what he did, his career, I think just what he did for Italian soccer as well. Just I think the guy's a legend. I got to shoot Pirlo when he was with NYCFC. When was that? Back in like 2016, 17, something like that. When he came to Toronto, and that was pretty cool too. But yeah, I think Buffon's got to top that list.
Top three favorite sports memories as a fan?
Ooh. Uh, I mean, I wish I could say something to do with the Leafs, but the Leafs haven't been good for a while. So, I'm a Canucks fan at heart. So I mean, at 2011 run, their Cup final run there, that one was good up until about Game 7. So that was a lot of fun to watch. Um, I remember going. This one always sticks with me. I don't know why. I was like probably 6 or 7 years old and went to a Leafs Flyers game with my dad and I guess like family friends and their kids. And for whatever reason, like a full line brawl broke out, and it was like I think it was like Cujo and like Roman Czechmanic. and it was like same thing. It was like Battle of Alberta style, like goalie fights, everything. I just remember like my dad just like lifting me up, like just so I can try and see it. Um, same thing. I have like very vague memories of it because I was so young. But that's definitely up there. Um, and then probably the last one, same thing. It's a stereotypical Italian answer, but Euros last year, or was that 2 years ago? Last year, COVID time. I've lost track of what year is what and what happened when. Um, but yeah, Italy winning the Euros. I was actually down in Tampa at the time, covering the Stanley Cup final, and I just remember like basically throwing my shoulder up, fist pumping when they scored in the last. They was it? It was Donnarumma stopped the last penalty kick, and yeah, it was a fun time. It was like 30 seconds celebration. Call my dad. He was over with my nonna and family and everything. And then I was like, great. Well, I got no one around to celebrate with, so I'm just probably gonna go for a run outside or something.
You would put that over 2006 World Cup?
I was so young with 2006 that I barely remember it. I was actually up 2006 World Cup. I was actually up in my uncle's cottage. I think it was what, like 10 or 12 at the time, something like that. And I totally forgot it was on. And then I remember being like, oh, like the World Cup finals on today. We should probably like look and find it. And he's up in like cottage country, so he at the time, this is 2006, they didn't have great service or anything like that. So we're like trying to flip through channels and we're like trying to fix the antennas and things like that. And we're like, oh, we found it. And I think we caught like the last bit of like extra time and like some of the penalties, and we were just like, and then like it just like ended, and I was like, okay, they won. And we just like went back and just like chilled by the lake and stuff like that. So 2006 wasn't as much of like a celebration or as much memory for me. Where I think the what would be the 2020 Euros, that's a memory that'll stick with me for a while.
Alex, I want to thank you so much for having been on today's episode. It was super awesome to get to chat with you about being a creative, how you entered into the sports industry, and all the different types of cool events and work that you've done in only just a short span of time since you graduated from Ryerson, man. It was a pleasure, and I thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it. We finally got it all figured out. Finally got a chance to chat. So thank you for having me on, and yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And thank you to the listener for enjoying today's episode with social media producer for Sportsnet, Alex Dedeze.